hear the orchestra hidden inside the piano, sense the interwoven voice, and perhaps even feel the irresistible flow of the dance rhythms. So our lecture will divide into 4 parts: symphonic, polyphonic, dance elements, and the conclusion. Okay, the first part symphonic approach manifests in these piano sonatas. The most obvious in this sonata are the textural and the registral elements. Haydn assigns different registers on the keyboard to imitate orchestral sections. For example, the high right hand lines may evoke woodwinds or violins, while the low left hand imitates cellos, bassoons, or horns. This diversion creates a spectacle accordiistic effects, akin to a conductor dancing an orchestra's instrumental groups. Now, we can listen to the first example. When imagined with a symphonic context, the right hand motive can be likened into a delicate woodwind choir, such as flutes and oboes, articulating the themes in the upper register, while the leaping left hand complement may resemble low strings or horns, providing a subdued response and harmonic cushion. These woodwinds with string timbral contrast gives even the short themes a layered and three-dimensional quality. As the phrase builds in complex, one might imagine violas or cellos entering the lower register to add weight and dynamic breadth. Such a coarse register interventional demonstrates Haydn's ability to simulate an orchestral ensemble at the keyboard. And the example 2 is the beginning of the second movement. We can listen first. Symphonic finale. Mixing isolated in a bright upper register. It may be imagined as played by clarinets, oboes, or upper strings, projecting an elegant and lucid scenery. Now we can listen. Suggesting the entry of brass instrumentals or timpani. These drinking contracts create a dramatic progression akin to the festive episode, writing commonly found in symphonic finales. And the last example, conventional modify recalling the third movements enhance the work's overall structural unity and playful coherence. Now we can listen. First questions and answer. Can be interpreted as the orchestral gestures of woodwind choir, such as bassons, piccolos, or French horns interacting with comic timing or timbral color. Haydn's sonata form often mirror the large-scale architectural planning of symphonic movements. Themes are contrast-blooded, with clear tonal and the development section unfold with dramatic section, much like symphony's development. Moreover, the motifs introduced in the first movement often reappear transformed in later moments, weaving a cyclical symphonic fabric. The use of sudden dynamic contrast, accurate phrasing, and textural layers provide the listener with the impression of orchestral depth. On the fortepiano, these effects are enhanced by the instrument's distinct tonal zone and quick decay, which allow voice to be more clearly separated. Next, we can watch a video of the pianist playing the fortepiano. First, a video of Blottigan playing this sonata. instrumental groups. For instance, the right hand's melody may be treated as the first violins, requiring lyrical sing tone and expressive phrasing, and the left hand's complement might function as the cellos or basses, demanding a warm, supportive sound. Inner voice, if present, could simulate woodwinds or brass, calling for clear and distinct articulation. Pedal usage must be careful, controlled to avoid blurring these textural layers. Preserving the quality and separation essential to orchestral illusions. Imagine yourself as a conductor directing a chamber orchestra with only your two hands. This imaginative process enriches your phrasing, touch, and dynamic control. So, the symphonic elements in Haydn sonatas represent the profound fusion of compositional innovation and expressive ambition. It transcends mere imitation of orchestral sound. Is a reimagining of orchestra within the keyboard's confines. Approaching these sonatas symphonically invites performers and listeners alike to the experiences Haydn's music as dynamic, multi-voice drama, one where a single player evokes an entire orchestra's colors, tensions, and dialogues. Part 2, Polyphonic. When we hear the word polyphony or counterpoint, many of us think immediately of Bach, but in Haydn's piano sonatas, polyphony is not merely a historical reenactment. It's a compositional method fully integrated with the classical style. Haydn's use of counterpoint is not about writing exotic fugues. Instead, he waves into the relationship between the melody and accompaniment, creating a sense of dialogue and intellectual tension. In Haydn's piano sonatas, polyphony is not just decorative, it's an integral part of his musical language. While his works are often classified as belonging to the classical style, one can clearly sense Baroque influence in many details, particulating in his masteries of contrapuntal textures. Like most composers of 18th century, Haydn underwent rigorous contrapuntal training. From his youth, he studied fugue, imitation, and inversion, and absorbed much from works by Bach's family. This foundation enabled him to seamlessly integrate contrapuntal techniques into a preliminary harmonic classical style. In his piano sonatas, Haydn's contrapuntal writing appears in three main ways. First, imitative counterpoint is one of the most common techniques. Haydn often presents a motif in one hand and immediately has the other hand imitate it at different pitch. This back and forth makes the music feel like it's constantly chasing and responding. Second, fragmentary canon and fugue. While Haydn rarely writes a full fugue in his sonatas, he often embeds fugue melodic line equally with the right hand, sometimes even interrupting or taking over the melody. This makes the music flow like conversation rather than monologue. The performer must ensure that each melodical strand is clearly articulated. Listeners should feel as multiple characters are conversing. Independence of fingers. Different touch and balance dynamics are crucial. Let me play a passage from the first movement, example 5 and 6. Example 5. A brief passage of intensive writing subtly introduces polyphonic elements within the prevailing harmonic context. Initially, both hands move in parallel motion with matching rhythmic pattern, which are then inverted to create decorational contrast and hide inner tension. Notability. A clear intention emerges. One voice presents a motive that is answered immediately by the other, forming a short yet perceptible call and response contrapuntal dialogue. While not a strict fugato, the passage embodies pursuando polyphony trends such as melodic symmetry, motivic reflection, and directional opposition, resulting in increased structural, logic, and textual context. Example 7 is the same. Now, let's look at the example 6. The development section introduces a new theme contrast with clear contrapuntal intent. This passage marks a shift from the light, dense light texture of exposition into a denser, more architectonic contrapuntal fabric. Three voices are heard in active motion, with frequent harmonic change and rhythmic intensity. Now, we can listen to each part separately. It's about making the piano's single timbre more varied, more three-dimensional, and more logical. It ensures that every note has a role and a line to speak, not just a complement or declaration. Part 3, Dance Elements. Next, let's watch a video of the minuet and get a feel of the minuet. regulation in other later works by Haydn, as well as parallel developments in works by Mozart or early Beethoven. Moreover, the limitations of performing such stylistic contrast on modern instruments raise questions about his historical informed interpretation